Tonight, I saw West Side Story, the Steven Spielberg version. I'm just right outside the movie theater. I went over to the Alamo Draft House, located in Lower Manhattan, which is a great movie theater. And I wanted to give you a New Yorker's review of West Side Story just outside the theater, my immediate first impressions. But more specifically, I'm going to title this a New Yorker's review, but even more specific, a New Ricans review of a West Side Story. I'm not going to use that term for the title because many people out there in the world still don't know the term New Rican. It's still kind of very a specific New York term. But for me, I grew up New Rican, which means a New Yorker raised, a Puerto Rican raised in New York. And that, for me, to see this film means a little bit extra special. It's something a little bit more closer to my heart. And I think it's very fitting that we're going to discuss this film today. For the first 15 minutes, I'm going to discuss no spoilers at all. I'll be as generic as possible and not give any plot points away. And then later on, I will tell you my spoiler-filled review. So to not spoil what is it, 60s. So that's 60s, that's 40, 20, that's, wow, 60-year-old musical. To not spoil a 60-year-old musical. Actually, I'll keep it to 10 minutes because I think many people already know what happens in West Side Story. But let me show you the movie theater I went to. This is the Alamo Draft House. It doesn't look like a movie theater. Well, that's because it's inside a massive skyscraper, which is the Chase building. Let me show you around. And it's actually located deep within the basement. And we're right by the Federal Reserve building right now. And this is in downtown Manhattan. And I just saw West Side Story. This is the original poster. Sorry, everyone. There's a little technical issue. This is the original Natalie Wood version. So, welcome everyone. Nice to see you here. And since this is live, feel free to ask me any questions about West Side Story specifically. Maria Mavis says, I love the original. And Dolores says, Maria. Indeed, Maria. Yes. Miss Rita is just as fabulous as ever, says Lisa Graham. Yes. Rita Moreno, which was, I think, the only Puerto Rican in the cast. There might have been extras or background cast members. But I think out of the main stars of the original West Side Story, I think Rita Moreno was the only Puerto Rican one. And this goes into my big reason why I love this film more than the original. Yeah, I said it. I think this version of Steven Spielberg's West Side Story supersedes the original film from the 1960s for many reasons, but one of them is Rita Moreno. In the original film with Rita Moreno, she plays Anita, and first of all, she's the supporting female cast member. So the Maria was played by Natalie Wood. So if people don't know, that there's two main characters. This is not really too many spoilers. It's basically Romeo and Juliet set in New York City's San Juan Hill, which is modern day Lincoln Center. And that lends into another point why I love this version of the film even more. And in essence, two main characters fall in love. Maria, which is a Puerto Rican character, someone who just fresh off the boat, in essence, well, fresh off the plane in Puerto Rican context, and moving to New York with her brother Bernardo, and she falls in love with a white guy whose name is Tony. I'm not sure in the original film what ethnicity he was, but in this film he's Polish American. And the two gangs are at war. The Sharks, which are Puerto Ricans mostly. There might be a Cuban or Dominican in there, but it's mostly Puerto Rican. And the Jets, who are mostly Italian, at least in the original musical, but in this film it's kind of a mishmash of Italian, Irish, and Polish ancestors. So Rita Moreno was Anita, which was the best friend of Maria, and the girlfriend of Bernardo, which is Maria's brother, the head of the Sharks. She was basically the only Puerto Rican casted. And unfortunately, Rita Moreno, who's around my skin tone, had to wear brown face, along with many of the other Puerto Rican characters in the original film. Most of the Puerto Rican characters were played by non-Puerto Ricans. They weren't even Hispanic. They were not Dominicans. They were not Mexicans. They were not Cubans. They were mostly all white Americans. Some Italian, I think some Irish maybe, but mostly white Americans. I generally wouldn't mind that, but it was a bit of a bummer to see them not consider Puerto Rican actors at that time, because as evident in the 1960s and the explosion of salsa, it is very evident that there was many, many talented Puerto Ricans out there. Puerto Ricans end up taking the world of music and dance for many decades all the way until now, even with reggaeton taking over the airwaves all around the world. So that was very disheartening when I saw the original West Side Story as a Nuyorican. I don't look like a stereotypical Puerto Rican as many people would assume to be, because many people assume Puerto Ricans to be rather darker in skin tone with a little mustache and quite an accent. That's not how I grew up. At least that's not how I look, or I don't fulfill that stereotype. So it was disheartening to see the original film exaggerate that stereotype by putting these white American actors in brown face and having them really have exaggerated accents and also exaggerated little mustaches. So this was a huge step up, because Rita Moreno is also in this film and she plays a different character. I won't tell you what until the spoiler section, but she plays a different character and she's not wearing brown face. And the other great thing is all the Puerto Rican characters are played by Hispanic actors. I think many of them are Puerto Rican. The main actress is Puerto Rican, and there is no exaggeration of Puerto Ricanness aside from maybe the fact that they speak Spanglish, which is pretty accurate, I think, especially for 1950s Puerto Ricans. A lot of them came over here. Many extended family members that I know came over here, and they didn't know English coming over here. So that is pretty accurate. But it was very nice to see Rita Moreno play a Puerto Rican character, a different one from the original, and not have to wear brown face. She looked how she looks, Rita Moreno, and they didn't exaggerate anything. The other thing I liked about Rita's character in this film is that she plays a abuela character. I won't tell you any more than that. But in the Heights, there's also an abuela character. And I'm going to compare this a lot with In the Heights. Because In the Heights is almost like a modern West Side Story without the crime, without the tragedy. And there's also an abuela character in the Heights, but that abuela character is very kind of stereotypical of a abuela character. If you don't know what the term abuela means, it means a grandmother. And it's very stereotypical abuela. I like that this version does not fall too much on the stereotype of an abuela, a grandmother. Like Italians have stereotypes with the nonna, and probably in the UK you might have stereotypes with the nanny, mammy. Nanny? Mammy's not a good word. Nanny? There might be a different word. Tell me the UK word. Ignore the other word I said. So yeah, I really enjoyed that there was more groundedness in the characters here. And then when it came to the other characters, the Jets, they were very well diverse. You can tell that there was an Italian-looking guy, there was a Polish-looking guy, there was an Irish-looking guy. You can tell that some of them were mixed. You can tell that there was a good variety. So, I love this version way more than the original. The very first shot convinced me, oh, I am in for a different experience. The very first shot. Mater says Nana. Okay, Nana, let us know what's the UK term. I don't think it's Nana. The very first shot convinced me. James says, do you have any tips for community at night? I'm not answering any questions about travel. Feel free to ask me anything about West Side Story. Can you show us the original program? Asked Catherine. There we go. Best Supporting Actress, Rita Moreno, first Puerto Rican to win a actress role. Thank you so much, Dolores. Granny is the term for, or mum. Yeah, granny or mum. Thank you so much. That's the British/Irish term. So, okay. I'm still gathering my thoughts, so pardon the scatteredness of this. This is very kind of impromptu. And this is like really the first time I'm doing a movie review live. But this is very New York, so I think a lot of people ask for this. I gotta provide context. The original West Side Story was made by Jewish Americans who wanted to make a version of Romeo and Juliet of Italian Americans versus Mexican Americans in LA. But then when Leonard Bernstein and the producer, if anyone can remind me of his name, the name is in that program. He's also a very famous producer. And then later Stephen Sondheim, they all got together and ended up realizing, wait a minute, we have no clue anything about LA. We have no idea what LA is about. And many of them had even less idea of what the Chicano, the Mexican-American crowd was like. They had no clue. Remember, this was back in the 1950s. This was before we really started seeing TV series about Chicanos, which are Mexican-Americans, in mainstream television. So they had no clue. And they decided, all right, instead of setting it in LA, let's set it in New York City, our territory. But then they started considering what places to set it in. And they thought first to themselves, let's set it in the Lower East Side. But then they end up realizing, oh, the East Side Story, they didn't like how that sounded. East Side Story really didn't like the sound of it. They wanted it in the West Side. So they had to search for a different neighborhood that had similar dynamic to the Lower East Side. The Lower East Side's dynamic at that time was a combination of the already second or third, fourth generation Jewish Americans now colliding with a lot of the Puerto Ricans that end up coming in. But they wanted a dynamic that was Italians versus Puerto Ricans. So then they considered East Harlem, which is Spanish Harlem. But then it'd still be the East Side Story. Kind of didn't have a ring to it. So they end up going with San Juan Hill, which is located right by the Upper West Side, modern day Lincoln Center, Lincoln Square. And that is very important. Because as they were writing this musical, Stephen Sondheim was basically an unknown. Leonard Bernstein was already a notable composer of classical music, and they wanted to make this Shakespearean level Broadway musical. San Juan Hill, you don't know the name, most of us, because it no longer exists. It was completely torn down Everything was torn down. I think it was the equivalent of 10 to 20 blocks around there. And at that time, New York City was more dense than it is even today. A lot of people sprawled out after the 50s to the suburbs. So, how this was going to be set in a neighborhood that was going to be long dead, probably once the musical came out, and definitely once the movie came out. When the musical was a hit, the movie immediately got greenlit, and they end up deciding to make the movie and shoot it on location in San Juan Hill itself. But at that time, San Juan Hill, of course, was already marked for demolition. So most of the people there were evicted. They end up having a good opportunity, this Hollywood set, because it's a lot harder, especially in the 1950s, especially when it comes to sound and when it comes to controlling crowds. It's very hard to film in a crowded place, especially a musical, especially singing and dancing. Really hard to film. So they were in luck. They had an empty neighborhood that was set for demolition, and they can film all that they want, all these song and dance scenes. So the original version has these scenes set in what is pretty much an empty neighborhood. And it feels empty. It looks empty. You can see that it is very evident just by even looking at the film that this neighborhood is dead. A lot of people might think initially that was a Hollywood set, but it wasn't. But it feels like one, because the neighborhood wouldn't be around after that film would release. And that brings me to why this version that I was tempted not to even see. I was tempted to not even go tonight to see West Side Story. Because I thought it was going to be a remake, going on the same territory as the previous. Just having some token diversity in it. I didn't want to have some token diversity. They already did a great job in the first one, and sure, they didn't hire Puerto Ricans, but I don't know. I just did not care for having a movie that was basically a remake to just end up casting actual Puerto Ricans this time. To me, I think that would have been a rather dull reason to remake it. But it starts. Rather than the cityscapes like it starts in the original, the very first shot, and now we're going to spoiler section. Actually, I'll tell you one more minute without spoilers. The very first shot is a shot of the demolition of already a few blocks in the neighborhood. In the original, the first shot was just the general city. I think they kind of show some blocks kind of ruined, but this one goes full force into how the neighborhood is going away. And it's becoming a core part of this story, of this version of West Side Story. How an entire swath of two distinct minority groups in New York City were being evicted from their homes, forced to relocate, and most of the time not even paid fairly for their property. When it came to many of the Puerto Ricans, they didn't own the buildings, so they were just merely kicked out. Their communities were ripped apart in order to build a performing art center, which I am all for building new things in New York City, but I think there's always better ways of maintaining the communities if you need to move people around. But New York City usually wasn't interested in that with many minority groups. Puerto Ricans is one of them, Italians, Jews, African Americans. Many others were unfairly relocated, including the Native Americans back in Dutch New Amsterdam times. So, that ended up putting a weight to this film that I don't think the original had. And that, oof, it convinced me just in the first 5 minutes. It convinced me, this is going to be different. This is going to be something new. Something's coming, as the song says. That's how I felt. Something's coming. Lo and behold, to summarize my thoughts, this is a masterpiece of musical filmmaking, in my opinion. The actual way the film is shot feels like the best parts of the Les Mis movie version, the one that was made 6, 7, 8 years ago, around there. That film I liked. I really loved it. A lot of people hated it, but the interesting thing about that film is that they tried to film everything on set, there in person, the singing and dancing. There's less dancing in that film, but they try to film everything, all the singing there in person on set, which most musical films actually kind of don't do. The singing is added in post. And it got the best of that film in terms of the realness. You felt like you were there. It also got the best parts of other classical musical films where many of the numbers just felt magical. It felt like people were coming together. It captured that part of Broadway where you really feel like it's all a cohesive production. Everything feels like it's every little piece is a cog in the greater machine of a joyful time. And Steven Spielberg used his best techniques that he uses in his own films, namely making the place look alive, which unfortunately the original movie did not do. A lot of the shots barely had extras, barely had a city life in the background. This one had a full city life, and you felt it. It felt being transported back into the 1950s, which most musical films don't do. And in my opinion, In the Heights did not do so well either. In the Heights sure had a lot of people in the background, but it felt rather forced. This one felt real, felt like you were there. And it's because Steven Spielberg is very good at filming large groups of people. And he's very good at kind of making layers to the scene in terms of how it's composed. So of course there's the singing and the dancing in the foreground, there's more singing and more dancing in the background, and usually it finishes there for most Hollywood musicals. But in the far background, you have the scenery, the businesses, people still walking in and about, still the cars passing through, and they weren't using CGI. Or if they did, they used it very cleverly, so it didn't feel that way. So all that came together and just felt so powerful. So Steven Spielberg showed that you can take Hollywood-style filmmaking techniques and implement them into a Hollywood musical. Because this is nothing new for Steven Spielberg. Steven Spielberg, a lot of people might not know the history of Steven Spielberg, but many, many years ago, back in the 1980s, he was hot off the wheels of Jaws. And he grew up during the time of not just the sci-fi serials of Flash Gordon and such, and the monster movies of Universal Studios, but he also grew up in the time of massive musicals, movie musicals that were immense productions. But they end up becoming so big, so bloated in the history, in the 60s especially. The budgets got so big that they end up bleeding money, and it died. Movie musicals would barely be seen. Cabaret popped up and a few others, but that was pretty much it. Until very recent. And thanks to Hamilton making musicals really mainstream in terms of everywhere around the world, who's made by a New Rican as well, but also because of bringing everything also because of films like Les Mis and also other films that have come recently. So that, I think, is the very interesting part of that film. It brings big Hollywood spectacle, the grounded realism of great film techniques that don't rely on heavy CGI, like in The Heights, but rely on classic filmmaking techniques that don't require visual effects. And great singing and dancing. The acting plus the singing and dancing were unbelievable. While Les Mis might have seemed rather melodramatic because of Russell Crowe's kind of lack of singing technique, or Anne Hathaway's babbling as she was singing, or In the Heights felt very Broadway-esque. This one, they combined both the best of Hollywood, which was great acting, powerful acting, realistic acting, with great singing, and doing those at the same time, which most Broadway actors can't really do because it's a different medium. If you're acting in a audience, you have to project. So you're mostly projecting. So you're kind of exaggerating many of the emotions. But on camera, you can't project because the camera's right there. It's like right there. If you act like a Broadway star, it's gonna come off too much. So lo and behold, highly recommend watching West Side Story. Now let's go into spoilers. So I hope, let me know if you enjoyed that movie review. This is my first movie review on live video. I really don't do too many movie reviews because the show is about travel and history, but this film is about travel. I mean, this film is basically about New York and about history, so I guess it was very appropriate. So let me know if you want to see more of these kind of city-related or history slash city-related movies. They're very specific, but let me know if you want to see more of those. So spoilers alert, everyone. Write down in the comments, spoilers alert. Put the timestamp, 27:23 is spoilers. Well done, bring on the spoilers. Love the New York City background. Well, Kelly says, Kelly, oh, thank you so much. What are your thoughts on the unsubtitled Spanish? Thank you so much, Dr. Moss. Thank you so much for tuning in. Okay, so again, everyone, spoilers, 27:33, spoilers. What do I think? So in this film, they speak a lot more Spanglish than the original, a lot more. And they don't put subtitles on the Spanish segments. There's not like entire scenes that are in Spanish, but there are like 2 or 3 scenes that are Spanglish with a heavy emphasis on Spanish. So you might hear a word or there, you might understand something if you don't know Spanish, but still might be hard to make out. And they'll put subtitles. And Steven Spielberg specifically asked for no subtitles, and the studio fought back on that, and he's like, no subtitles. I'm not sure what his reasoning is. Let me know what was his reasoning, but I enjoyed it. I know Spanish, so I can't tell you from the perspective of a non-Spanish speaker, but I did enjoy it for the main reason that the context of the story is that they don't know that, okay, the context of the story is that Puerto Ricans are trying to fit in. Ironically, it's not painted neither so bad for Puerto Ricans like other films. Other films, unfortunately, when it centers around a Puerto Rican character or Hispanic character, I'll speak for my own people. When they cover Puerto Rican characters, sometimes it's all like, oh, poor me, I am subjugated. Yeah, I get it, but sometimes that's the only character trait. Oh, poor me, pity me, I'm being persecuted and subjugated and oppressed by the system or by so-and-so group of people. Poor me. They did not do that here at all. Actually, the Puerto Ricans were made to look like they were the upstanding crowd in this context. And I think it's pretty accurate to the history of the neighborhood, because San Juan Hill was a pretty fast-growing middle-class Puerto Rican neighborhood. If it would have continued, it would have been on the level of Williamsburg, the Jewish side of Williamsburg, that ended up becoming pretty much a middle-class Jewish neighborhood. Or it would have been along the lines of a Italian-American Bensonhurst. But as I mentioned, it was destroyed and the community was ripped apart, and Puerto Ricans, for the most part, did not recover. Some of them had to move to affordable housing, which was terrible, terrible circumstances. So we never did get that middle-class Puerto Rican neighborhood as we do have with a Bensonhurst that's very Italian-American, or Chinatown, or a Polish Greenpoint. And that brings me to the subtitles. A lot of the Puerto Ricans at that time wanted to fit in. They wanted to grow beyond their initial circumstances of coming over to this country in poverty. And part of that is the language. This was the 1950s. Puerto Ricans were not taught, at least a good portion of them. I know this from anecdotes I've heard in my entire life. I have, my grandparents used to barely know any English. They weren't taught English. They didn't know English when they came here. And part of trying to fit in was fitting in with the language. But Puerto Rico is a very unique circumstance that was different from German immigrants, or say Italians, or some other groups like maybe Polish. Puerto Rico was, in essence, colonized by America, made into a territory. So Puerto Rico has always had this kind of battle between, am I American or am I Puerto Rican? Pulls at every Puerto Rican's heart. And it pulls at Puerto Ricans specifically stronger because we are within the boundaries of the US. Unlike Italy, unlike Ireland, unlike Poland or Germany, we are under their territory. So it's almost both an act of defiance to want to keep the culture, to want to keep the Spanish language, to want to keep our flag, and to want to keep our customs, but at the same time to grow and progress and live a fulfilling, happy life. And that's where language really comes in point. A lot of people might wonder, why do Puerto Ricans dress up from head to toe in Puerto Rican colors on the Puerto Rican Day Parade? Why? One of the reasons is because for, I think, a decade or two or three, a few decades, it was illegal to wave the Puerto Rican flag. It was illegal to show some type of Puerto Ricanness. There was an entire town in Puerto Rico that was sterilized without their consent by an American pharmaceutical company that was signed off by the government. Not conspiracy, it's real. You can read it. This was covered in the news. It was pretty well published. And there's entire books about it. I think it was 400 women in Puerto Rico. when you have those two things like that happen, it's hard to completely abandon Spanish, to abandon salsa, or nowadays reggaeton, to abandon the flag. It's hard. Why would you? But also it's hard to say no to the US. You're already a citizen of the most powerful passport in the world. And if you're not coming from good circumstances, you can't just say no to the US. Either you stay in Puerto Rico or really, really struggle trying to move elsewhere. Really struggle. So it's good that they didn't put subtitles in there for Spanish, because it puts you in the mindset of both the Americans at that point. Of course, they were descendants from a host of different countries, Americans, and it puts you in the mindset of the Puerto Ricans themselves. Even if you don't know Spanish, puts you in their mindset. That insistence to continue the Spanish language. And that was a great move. That was a great move. So thank you so much, Dutch, for asking that. Dutch is a fellow New Rican, so it's awesome. Richard says, you're doing a good job. I heard a lot of Puerto Ricans join the military. Yeah, indeed, I have many family in the military. Hard to adjust to another with a lot of hurdles. And let's not discuss the modern politics of it in the comments. But it's okay to chat a little bit about the history. And let's keep it nice. Catherine says, loving this history lesson. I'm glad. So feel free to ask me anything else about the movie. Another thing I enjoyed is I tried watching the original, and every time I watch the original, I fall asleep after the two head of the gangs die, Bernardo and the head of the Jets. I just fall asleep. I kind of get bored after that. It felt like everything was kind of positive and I don't know, fun. It felt everything was fun, dramatic, maybe surely heading toward tragedy, but it felt fun. And and then these two guys die, and I just kind of lose interest, kind of just get bored, and I always fall asleep. But this one, I got even more invested after that. I think I'm not sure if this is 3 acts or 5 acts. Let me know, what's the structure of West Side Story? It feels like a 5 act. To me, it doesn't feel like a 3 act, but I might be wrong. Let me know if anyone knows for sure. After that final act, that climax, I actually got even more invested. I was really engaged. Steven Spielberg did not change the tone too much. Somehow he set up the realistic nature of the world in such a great way that it felt like a natural transition from this kind of, oh, tonight we're falling in love, Maria, something's coming. All those songs, Be a Jet, and Mr. Krupke, all these like funny songs. And then transitioning to something very Shakespearean, very dark, very melodramatic. But it felt like a natural transition, and it felt like, oh shit, things got real. This was one of the first films where no one stood up when the credits started rolling. Sabi just said, I saw it today, I cried so many times. I was the first one to stand up because I really needed to go to the bathroom. But people sat there. I think people were in shock and awe, and I heard a lot of sniffles. The movie just hits you. Did people applaud? No. it did not feel appropriate to applaud. The movie was great. In my opinion, I think it's one of the best musical movies ever made. I really like Les Mis, but this to me beats Les Mis in terms of its punch. It didn't feel appropriate to clap. So G Papa says, do you feel the ending on the new one was rushed? Rachel's mourning was not gut-wrenching enough to feel the same impact that Natalie Wood had on the first film. So honestly, I always fell asleep in that latter quarter of the film. So no, I didn't think it was rushed. I actually really enjoyed how it was more impactful because it was a bit more condensed than maybe the original version. I like how there was Steven Spielberg, as I mentioned, is very good at layering the composition of a shot, cinematographically speaking. It's a very hard word to say, but it's very good at composing the visuals. But he's also very, his writer, Kushner, he was very good at layering the story as well. And I like that this story did not have a Maria that was just ditzy or kind of lovey-dovey, like too lovey-dovey, like the original. I like that this Maria was a bit naive, actually very naive, and it's appropriate because she's a very young girl. And I like how she was in this film. I think that naivety lended to why the ending, in my opinion, was more impactful. Because you felt like, oh, this girl is very naive, and there's a tragedy where, of course, people die, but for her, it's a big learning moment. It's a moment where she has to grow up. I did not feel that in the original. I did not feel like Natalie Wood needed to grow up. I felt like Natalie Wood was a victim of the circumstances. But here, no, she was fully part of the entire ordeal. Can't blame her at all, no, of course. But she was a part of it, part of the entire tragedy. Yeah. That's why I think it's a punch. And then the other thing is, I really like Tony in this film. Yeah, someone said that he was Italian. I think he is Italian in the original. If anyone can confirm, I think he is Italian in the original. In this version, he is Polish, which still kind of makes sense because Polish and Puerto Ricans collided in Greenpoint, Brooklyn. Not in San Juan Hill, I don't think so, but definitely in Greenpoint. Puerto Ricans and Polish definitely collided. I have a few friends that were Polish Ricans. So yeah, those two communities did collide. So it felt still realistic. The original Tony, in my opinion, was kind of a wimp. I don't know, kind of a wimp is not the best word, but kind of a dope. It was a dope. I didn't like him in the original. He was too lovey-dovey. I didn't feel so much for Tony in the original film. But in the original musical, I never seen the musical. Of course, that was in the 1950s. But in this version, when I heard the cast album of the original musical, which was recorded, it was you feel for Tony because something's coming in the original cast album. In my opinion, is very, very impactful. You feel like this guy's something's coming. He really feels it, you know. And The thing is that something is both good and bad. That's what people don't realize when it comes to life, that if you truly, really deeply want something, if you're moving towards a goal, remember, it's not only the positives of that goal, it's also the negatives. And that's why I really deeply relate to that song, Something's Coming. It's my favorite song out of the original cast album. So Tony in the original film version did not feel he felt very sweet. Kelly says it, yeah, he was sweet. He felt very sweet. This one did not, he was not that sweet. He felt more suave, he felt more debonair, and he still had that sweetness, but you can tell that he had a rough life and that he tried his very best to be so sweet. But he couldn't. He couldn't. And that's why I think this Tony is way better. This is a great Tony. And a great Maria. Someone earlier said there's no chemistry. I felt the chemistry. I saw the chemistry. But the thing is, I think it's on purpose that you might perceive it as no chemistry. Because these are two naive kids. This is not real love. At least not in this film. I don't interpret it that way. My interpretation of this version of the film is that this is not real love. This is a infatuation from two naive kids who grew up in tough circumstances and are deeply yearning for some love, for some warmth in their life. But don't realize that it's more complicated than just some type of infatuation, some type of quick romance. And B, love is deeper. It's not just about the surface level of, oh, I deeply, see you. You even see in this film, again, spoilers, even more spoilers. I'm going to get even more specific. So if you're watching, stop right now. I'm going to get even more specific. And then watch later after you watch the film. But the original scene, the scene here where Maria and Tony meet, Maria rushes into the kiss. She's deeply infatuated with Tony. I think a lot of us may have experienced that in our lives, both male and female, when we rush in a little bit too quickly, or someone rushes in at us a bit too quickly. You can tell that it's not love, it's infatuation mixed with yearning, with need. And this is what this film captures very well. This is not a love story, nor this is a story about love. This is a story about an infatuation gone wrong. This is a story about a lack of love. So, yeah. I hope that makes sense. Let me know if you have any other questions. I got to stand up a little bit. Getting too tired. This bench is very cold. Not good for sitting on cold benches. Put the camera over here. So feel free to ask me anything else. Class says, yes, in this one, Maria goes all in and kisses Tony. And I'm like, wow, whoa, slow down there, girl. Yeah. You have my attention, Ariel. Beautiful story. I'm glad you enjoy, everyone, this story. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for tuning in. Yes, and this one, Maria goes all in. The majority of West Side Story was filmed in Patterson, New Jersey. Oh, good to know. But they did indeed film in San Juan Hill. Who had the best voice? Oh, that's a good question. I was really blown away by the main jet, Riff. I don't think it was the voice, but there was something about that guy, that actor. Who is he? That actor, oh my God. There's something about him. And then the other person, he should be nominated for Best Supporting Actor, that guy who played Riff. If anyone can search his name. He should win Best Supporting Actor. I don't think I've seen any other film that had a better supporting actor. That man was magnetic, and you felt for him. He wasn't just a common gangster like I think in the original as well. I'm bashing the original even though it's a great film. I do recognize that, but I really love this one. Where's San Juan Hill? It's a modern day Lincoln Square. No longer exists. It was torn down. Up and coming Puerto Rican middle class neighborhood, and unfortunately ripped out from Puerto Rican's hands. Yes, the Officer Krupke scene was one of my favorites, and this was his class. Yes, Officer Krupke is a very kind of a funny scene in the original film. If I recall correctly, in the making of the musical with Stephen Sondheim and Leonard Bernstein, they were very tempted to cut the Officer Krupke song, because there was about to be a very dramatic moment immediately thereafter, and they felt like it was inappropriate to have this funny song about the jets teasing one of the officers. Mike Faust is his name. Mike Faust. Thamara says, am I American? Yes, I'm a New Yorican. I am a Puerto Rican raised in New York. I am indeed American. I do consider myself American. I consider myself American. I consider myself Puerto Rican. So Officer Krupke was about to be cut off from the original, if I recall correctly. Don't quote me on this. I'm saying this off the top of my head. I researched West Side Story deeply about 2 years ago. I really got obsessed with learning about its history. But I did not refresh my memory in full for this. So don't do your research after this. But yeah, they cut off the song, and they decided against it. I think they decided against it because they realized things are about to get very heavy. There needs to be some levity. The thing is, in the original film, it still felt a little bit out of place, and I think it felt also out of place even in the original cast album. It does feel a little bit out of place, in a good way, because it is some kind of relief before the heavy drama. But this one was done in such an interesting way that you felt for the characters on a much more deeper level. Feist or Faust? Sorry, I might have mispronounced his name. Mike Feist is his name? Mike Feist? Might be mispronouncing his name. Feist. Very talented actor. You felt for the characters in this one. The lyrics are so well written by Stephen Sondheim. I don't think even in the original cast album, people realize how profound this song is. How, not profound, revealing this song is. That song, Officer Krupke, revealed the very rough past of these kids. How rough their upbringings were, and how they were aware of it, but they couldn't surpass them. And this is another part of the film, as I mentioned, that I really love. It layers the stories. The tragedy is not just with Tony dying, or Riff, or Bernardo, or Chino, basically headed for life in prison. or this neighborhood being torn down, but the tragedy is also with all those gangsters, the kids. They had terrible upbringings. And that Officer Krupke talks about them. Is this in the context of the original film, since it's, I think, shot in a bar in the pub, and they kind of, and Officer Krupke is kind of a buffoon. You don't really listen to the lyrics there. And that's part of the genius of Stephen Sondheim, who's the original lyricist, was that he wrote lyrics that weren't even fully felt in the first two versions of this film. But they're clear as day that Officer Krupke is not mere comic relief. Officer Krupke is these kids who grew up in the most terrible circumstances, trying to make light of something deeply tragic in their lives. And the biggest tragedy is that they know it all. They know exactly why their life is effed. And Steven Spielberg did a great job in conveying that. Had to read the book in middle school, says Dolita. Spoiler alert. Oh yeah, sorry everyone. Spoiler alert. If you're just tuning in live, yeah. I will keep an eye on Mike Feist if he's nominated for an Oscar, says Matt. I hope he is at least nominated. This is a remarkable review, says Kelly. Ariel, I truly want the movie more. Thank you so much. So many deep thoughts. Okay, everyone, I'll answer about 5 more minutes. I originally thought I was going to do this for 15 minutes or 20 minutes. Uh-oh, we have a jet and a shark. Cue the music. There we go. See, West Side Story is still alive here in New York City. Okay, Savvy asked the very last question. Where do you find the original program? You can only listen to the original cast album. I don't think the Broadway musical, the original one, was never recorded. People might have recorded versions of it that was pretty close to how the original one was directed. So maybe that's available. The film is also pretty close, I think, to how the original one looked on Broadway. So just watch the original Broadway, the original film from the late 50s, early 60s. Interesting observations and perspectives. Okay, so Sabby and Walter asked about In the Heights. I'm going to leave that for the very end. Let me answer a few quick questions. Is this a New York story? It is 100% a New York story, and it feels like a New York story. It is. There's many great films shot in New York or takes place in New York, but they're not New York stories. Serendipity, for example, I loved it. I saw the film again recently. Not a New York story, in my opinion. It's a great rom-com. New York is, there's part of New York in it, but doesn't feel like a New York story. When Harry Met Sally, it's not really a New York story. It's a great rom-com. It's a classic. It's one of the best movies ever made. Not a New York story. But this one is a New York story. Why? Because, especially in this version, New York is very much a part of it. And specifically with the characters. Italians, Puerto Ricans, very strong part of New York. Kelly says Rent is a New York story. Yes, Rent is very much a New York story. Someone earlier asked me, did I watch Tick, Tick, Boom? I tried watching it. I enjoyed about a quarter of it. I did not like the rest. I did not like it. I am not much of a fan of Larson's work, Jonathan Larson. I don't really like Rent. I tried watching the movie. I tried listening to the music. I like 26,000. In the Tick, Tick, Boom film, I only really enjoyed the number This is the life. What's the name of the song? Bobo. This is the life. Bo 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 bo. This is the life. That song is very good. Thanks for the unexpected live stream. I will answer the In the Heights question. Let me see anything else. Is in the 1950s, my mother cousins was beaten up badly by Italians, says Cynthia. Oh no, they had some ethics, so they took them to the hospital. Puerto Ricans joined gangs as defense. Yeah, yeah. So it's very much a New York story. Let's see if I missed any other questions. Mike. Faust was the original, Faust or Feist, let me know, what was his last name? He was the original Dear Evan Hansen. He played the brother who died. Oh, interesting. That's not a spoiler, that's the premise of the show, by the way. Used to live in Vinegar Hill area in the 50s, says Namer. Oh, wow. Narmer, that's cool. Must have been a very different neighborhood back then. There was probably some Puerto Ricans there, though I assume, was it Polish? What was Vinegar Hill? Let me know, what was the ethnic makeup? These are very deep observations. I can't wait to see the film now, says Dutch. I'm so glad. Dutch, thank you so much for asking a great question. Watching this is like reading a good book and you can't put the book down, says Catherine. Oh, wait for the very last one. Andrew, thank you so much for tuning in. Wait for the very last one, In the Heights. I'm going to compare it. And I'm going to tell you what I want to what Steven Spielberg did for West Side Story, I want to do for In the Heights. I'll tell you why. Okay. So, thank you everyone for Mike Feist. Thank you so much. Mike Feist is the actor. Yeah, if you cross an Italian village in certain states, they'll beat him up for not being Italian. Yeah, says Seti Julia. Seti Julia, right? Are you live tomorrow? Yes, 1 p.m. Saw the Rent play, was not too much of a fan either. Yeah, not too much of a fan of that musical style, but I can see why it's a great musical. I can recognize its greatness. Okay, so In the Heights. Let me grab some water. The final 10 minutes of this show. In the Heights is also made by a New Yorican, Lin-Manuel Miranda, who went on to make Hamilton. Lin-Manuel Miranda ended up becoming the youngest Tony Award winner for Best Composer. In the Heights, when it originally was going to be produced, a lot of the producers said, this story is good, but it doesn't have, like, could we add like a pregnant teenager? Could we add some gangs, like a gun? Could we add some type of murder? But Lin-Manuel Miranda was adamant, along with the rest of his collaborators, like the director, if someone could remind me of his name, he's a really great director, he also made Hamilton. He was very adamant that this was going to be a story about a Hispanic neighborhood made up of Dominicans, Puerto Ricans, and a few other Hispanics like Peruvians and Ecuadorians, but without any drugs, violence, or pregnant teenagers. And he fulfilled that. I saw the original Broadway production of In the Heights with Lin-Manuel Miranda, and it blew me away. Seeing that film made me feel like, oh, my identity is now truly shown in a big musical. I never fully saw myself as a New Yorican in the Broadway musical, at least my own upbringing. West Side Story wasn't enough. As I mentioned, it was a lot of non-Puerto Rican actors and brownface. I did not like that in West Side Story, but in the Heights I did. And then also I liked the fact that there was no crime, no teenage pregnancy involved in the Heights. No gangs, no drugs. That's how I grew up as a Puerto Rican here in the U.S. And I have many friends and family members that are Puerto Ricans in the U.S. And we did not grow up in that environment. There was no drugs, no crime, no gang violence. I am very grateful that I lived that life. Very grateful that I was never a victim of that. And that's the case for a good portion of us. Not all Puerto Ricans are living in terrible squalor, like many films might want you to think. And In the Heights captured that. And what I liked beyond that is In the Heights captured the essence of a community, which this film also does very well, especially for the Puerto Ricans. Also shows that community side. So, what do I think about the film In the Heights and related to West Side Story? In the Heights, in my opinion, misses the mark. Sure, there is no gang violence, no death, no high drama like this film, West Side Story. But the film didn't feel like it had enough weight. It doesn't need any of those terrible things to have weight. But if it doesn't have any of those dramatic elements, then you need to show it through the filmmaking. You need to show it through the acting. And in my opinion, the In the Heights film failed at that. It felt too Broadway. Broadway is great, but it's inherently a different medium. If you want to see a Broadway show on film, then just do what Hamilton did. Record it. Maybe record it in an interesting way like Hamilton, and boom, you're done. But if you're making a film, if you do too much of Broadway in it, you're going to be taken out of it. It's going to feel rather cloying. Some people might not know that word. Cloying means too lovey-dovey, too sweet. You ever had a candy that just, oh, so sweet? That's the problem with Broadway when it's translated into film. It runs at that risk, especially something that doesn't have high drama like a West Side Story. You run at the risk of it being too cloying. And In the Heights felt cloying. I did not like it because it was a celebration, but too much so. And the celebration felt too much of like if it was trying them to make a Broadway musical and just recording it on the street. I think there could have been way more filmmaking in that movie. And John Chu is a talented filmmaker, and he did an amazing job in Crazy Rich Asians, in my opinion. He directed In the Heights. But John Chu is not New York. He's not a New Yorker. He's from LA. He comes from the world from dance. I don't think John Chu knew the streets. And they had Washington Heights at their disposal. They filmed in the streets of Washington Heights, and yet when I saw the film, I did not feel like I was in Washington Heights. I felt like I was in a Hollywood set. And when I saw the songs, I felt like this is way too icky, too like too nice. I'll tell you one specific scene is one of the characters is having this revelation, and forgive me who it was, I think it might have been Vanessa. She's having this revelation, and this character is having a revelation. She goes out, storms out into the street, and she starts singing this beautiful, sweet revelation. And this is a dramatic, powerful moment for this character, where she's realized something in her life and she's like, F that previous life, I'm moving into a new life. And as she goes out and starts singing, people just come out of their cars. There's a guy hosing down the street and just stops and they all start singing with her as part of the chorus. And it undercut the moment. Because I get that the film is about community, but this moment is about Vanessa. And you have to be there with Vanessa. You have to be Vanessa. You can't just have random people on the street stop and start singing and not even move. They were singing still. And that scene, I think, highlights why that film, in my opinion, wasn't as effective as this one. So, West Side Story, I'm pointing over here because the movie theater is right here. West Side Story, yes, it had high drama, but when they were singing and dancing in the streets, it was done in such a seamless way that you end up realizing, and Frankie says, but Ariel, it is a musical. But there's a way of doing it that feels better on film. Vita says it right, that is silly, it ruined the dramatic moment. It undercuts the dramatic moment on film. On Broadway, it works when you have a dramatic moment with a character and people start joining in the chorus, but it doesn't work on film. Because on film, it's a medium where you're in the character's head because you can film a close-up. You feel that character when you get too close with them in the camera. You feel them. You're in their head. That doesn't happen in Broadway where you're this far away. It doesn't happen. So having more people around you feels more impactful. So when you have this on film of a powerful character moment, people are there standing around singing, it feels undercut. It lowers the dramatic weight of this. As I mentioned, not in Broadway. It adds to the dramatic weight. On film, it lessens it. This, he does it well. Because the layering, there's close-ups, you're there with the characters, there's dramatic moments. But the singing, the dancing, the singing seamlessly comes into play layer by layer. The secondary characters join on the dancing, and the dancing is done so well, so seamless. And then then characters stop in the middle of the street and then they join along. It's done by a layer in terms of the film language. That's why I think Steven Spielberg did something that John Chu did not do in the Heights. In the Heights can be a great film. And I want to be the one to make it. Because In the Heights deserves to have a true New York, gritty, immersive film experience in the when being adapted. And one thing I would do, one difference I would do if I were the director of In the Heights for a secondary version is that scene where there's the family dinner. And this family dinner, for people who don't know, very minor spoilers, don't worry. Basically, the characters unite, have a nice dinner together. There's a dramatic moment with two of the characters, and then they kind of just all get along right after that. And they start singing this beautiful canto, which is a Puerto Rican folk song, because some of the characters are doing this folk song. This canto is very powerful because singing a canto in Puerto Rican culture like in Irish culture, very similar. So there's similar cultures out there in the world. We sing a song. It's a truly communal moment. Everyone's joining in together. We don't really have this in America too much, but this is very prevalent in Puerto Rico. It's very prevalent in Irish culture. There's a few other cultures around the world that are like this. Let me know if what other cultures are like this. So they start singing this canto, and the way he films it, it's cutting. They're doing a lot of cuts, and he's filming far away. And for example, there's like dinner, there's like food served because it's a dinner, and he's filming the camera through like plates. And it feels like you are kind of voyeuring on this moment. He did that, I guess, to make it more look realistic. But if I were to do it, and I think that's the beauty of musicals especially, or basically any classic story, the beauty is that you can make so many different versions. That's why we keep making more versions of Shakespeare over and over and over again, including this one. West Side Story is not original. The original is not original. It's a reinterpretation of Romeo and Juliet. So nothing's really new. I think something new can be brought into the table. But for me, that scene, I would shoot it all in one take. I would emphasize the food, and I would shoot it in one single take, not cutting at all, because in that scene, I don't think if you cut, you undercut the emotion. Because when you have un canto, a song, a folk song, and you're not cutting through this dinner scene, and the camera's moving with the characters through the apartment, and the food is being served, and the emotions are rising, and people are feeling good. And once the song starts, since there was no cut, you feel like you're there, you feel like you're part of the family. So I would shoot it in all a single take, no cuts whatsoever. Almost like if it were a documentary style, you're going inside there and not cutting. And that will make you feel like you're part of that dinner. Like you're part of that family. Sharing in a beautiful moment together. So I hope everyone enjoyed this movie review. Thank you so much for watching. Lo and behold, West Side Story by Steven Spielberg, in my opinion, is an excellent film. I'll let it ruminate in my head, and hold off in telling you more than it just being excellent, because I have a feeling this might be one of the best film musicals ever made. But I'll get back to you on that. I'll feel it a little bit longer, but I feel all fluttery, like Maria did with Toady. I feel all fluttery inside. But luckily, I am not so naive like Maria. Hopefully, I'm not just merely infatuated with the film. Maybe it is true love. But I'll tell you in a few days. Ask me then. Everyone, thank you so much for tuning in. Irie says, thank you so much for the review. JD says, much enjoyed. Greece wasn't that originally Chicago. Maybe, I'm not sure. I don't think Greece is pretty different from Chicago. Is Spielberg a New Yorker? He is not. He's not a New Yorker. He grew up in LA or California, if I'm correct. Or somewhere, maybe not California, but somewhere in the West Coast. He is Jewish, but he's not a New Yorker. You don't need to be a New Yorker to make a New York film, but it pays off to kind of know more about New York, which I think Steven Spielberg or the writer really did his research. Laureen says, thank you. Laureen, thank you so much for tuning in. This was fun and very interesting. Can't wait to see the film. Great job, Professor Ariel, says Robert. Super interesante. That was fun. Thank you. Film editing 101. Yes, so film editing. Vita says about the dancers, the seamless way you're describing dance connected to drama relies so much on Jerome Robbins' choreography. And he was a genius in doing it. And I think this film really highlighted Jerome Robbins' choreography. I love the ballet sense. You wanted to see Kubrick-style filmmaking. I would use Kubrick techniques if I were to do In the Heights remake. Cannot agree more, says Dutch. Everyone, see you tomorrow at 1 p.m. Highly recommend seeing West Side Story in the big screen. It is a lovely, lovely time. It'll make you laugh, it'll make you cry, it'll make you want to sing and dance out loud in the streets. So everyone, tonight, something's coming, ladies and gentlemen. And Maria. Everyone, have a great night. Keep being awesome and always keep on exploring. Tonight, la 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 la.